All right. Well, welcome back to the Bitcoin podcast. Today we have with us Lucas Maddy and Grant Reichert, a couple of guys on the show that I know you're going to enjoy. So I first met you guys when my YouTube algorithm in January identified your own podcast and educational Bitcoin sessions. And so Farm Journal had published an article, and I was one of the people quoted in it, and that was the subject of that session. So that was really cool. So maybe just to dive in, how did you two guys meet one another, and what's the background to start a Bitcoin discussion forum?
Can I take this, Grant?
You take it, yeah.
So we grew up 30 miles away from each other out in western Kansas on farms, but we didn't meet each other until we were at Kansas State. When I was at Kansas State, I bought a trailer house because I wanted to feel like I was at home. And there was this TV show that was big at the time called House MD. It was about this like irascible doctor, and he's doing all these, he's just a jerk, whatever. So I loved him. And I used to host house parties at my place. So every week I would invite people over, we'd watch the show, and I'd cook. And one time Grant just randomly showed up at my house. He was friend of a friend, walked in wearing a beautiful navy overcoat, and being the best looking guy in the room, immediately did not like him. And no, he actually is fantastic guy. And so, yeah, we kind of met that way. And then we reconnected about 15 years after that, kind of stayed in touch a little bit, never really hung out a whole lot in college, but about 15 years after that, I was living down in a cabin in the Andes Mountains writing an album, and I was blogging, and I was writing about what I was doing. And Grant was living up in Wenatchee, Washington at the time. He was doing God's work as an immigration lawyer up there. He was reading my blog. He reached out, made the mistake of reconnecting. And then I went and lived with Grant for about 3.5 months up there. And we started a cold plunge society, made friends with about 30 yoga girls, and threw a hell of a party in a one bedroom apartment.
And so I had Lucas take that because he makes that sound a lot more fun and exciting than any of that actually was. But we'll go with that narrative. I like it.
It was pretty exciting when you got hit by a floating iceberg in the Columbia River.
That is a true story. There's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down. But I will say, just being from Northwest Kansas, I mean, anybody who comes from an agricultural background, when you find your folk again, wherever they are, whether they're in the Andes Mountains in Colombia, or I'm up in Wenatchee, Washington, the reconnection is instant. Just like the collective imagination that you share based on having grown up on, in our case, the Great Plains. I mean, we still dislike each other a lot. That hasn't changed, but otherwise, it's been great.
I'll move on to the next question. Lucas, so you managed a $100 million agriculture lending portfolio at Frontier Farm Credit. What was the moment that Bitcoin flipped from this is a really interesting thing to I need to build my life around Bitcoin, full orange pill?
Yeah. So it may have been 80 million, but if 100 million is what it says on LinkedIn, that's the lie I'm going with. I'm not sure. Anyway, so 2020, COVID, you had, in our area, you had the best yields, you had the best prices, you had the biggest government payouts that these guys had ever gotten in their lives, right? And September, all the balance sheets start coming in, and everybody's looking to renew their line of credit. And I couldn't figure out why everybody was going broke. So you had the best of everything, but now people that literally had never borrowed money in their entire life were coming through my door. And the guys that I had that were solid, we would rate them. We had a rating system. I think it was a 3 to 11. So like 3's are the strongest and 11 was the weakest, I want to say, something like that. So like my 3's turned into 5s, my 6's turned into 9s, and my 11s were in big trouble. Well, I didn't have it. We had another guy that managed the 11s. He had the problem children. But there wasn't really this like click as far as like, oh, Bitcoin's really interesting. There was this, I was just dumbfounded. This area right to the east of Manhattan, Kansas, around Wamego, there's a good bit of irrigation down in the valley. And you know, as well, I don't know, I assume it's the same, but November, December is when land trades hand. It's when all the land sales come up. And all of this irrigated land that had been trading for 6 to 6,500 was going for 9 to 9,500, just without fail. And I realized, you know, okay, this is the new high water mark. What's pushing this? I don't understand it. At the same time, um, I was learning about Bitcoin. I had bought a little bit. It ran up really fast. I sold it to take profit. Of course, never got a chance to get back in at the same. But I was learning a little bit about it. But I just kind of, it just all finally clicked to me. Like, you work for a bank and you're like, how does a bank make money? Because if we're lending out, at the time, we're lending out money for 3%. We're paying a 1% dividend on it. So we're making 2%. Like, you would never engage in any sort of business activity if you had a 2% profit margin. That would be stupid. And so that's when I got to learn about how banks create money, and fractional reserve lending. So, you know, a bank has $1 million. They're going to literally create $9 million out of thin air and loan $10 million against that one. And it's like, okay, so that's how banks make money. And then this idea of like cheap money, right? Because we went to ZIRP, zero interest rate. So cheap money, what does cheap money mean? Well, cheap money means that people that shouldn't be operating are operating, right? So a guy that can't afford a payment on a $6,000 piece of land can afford a payment on a $9,000 piece of land if you drop the interest rate down to 3%. So it brings in more players to the market. And I just started learning about this, you know, this expansion and contraction of creative destruction of markets, where you have a policy like a zero interest rate policy. And what that does is it floods in a bunch of people. They throw in a bunch of money. The shit operators fall out. We centralize again, and everything just gets bigger and bigger. This is why in Kansas, you know, 50 years ago, I think the average farm was like 400 acres. Now it's like touching 2,500, right? Where you push all the little operators out because you're in a commodity market. And the only way that you can win in a commodity market is to be the guy operating at scale with the lowest cost. So that was kind of I may have come to Bitcoin different than some people, because I came to it not through learning that Bitcoin was interesting, but learning through that the dollar was shit. And that's how I got to there.
Grant, how about you? What was your journey?
Oh, what was it? So 2021 is probably the most like pathetic origin story anybody could have. I was like nose down on the grind as an attorney, like not paying attention to like cataclysmic societal happenings in like 2021. Like I barely knew there was a pandemic because I was just working. And then my mom is a tax preparer, and she said, have you looked into this cryptocurrency thing? Because evidently the people, you know, treating their tax returns and whatnot were making some gains there. So it's like, oh, you know, I heard about Bitcoin way back in the day when it kind of first made the rounds on the podcast circle in 2012 or so. And then I was like, well, yeah, no, I know what this is. And so I decided to figure out what it was, and went through the typical kind of gestation stage of a cryptocurrency investor, where you lose a bunch of money on a bunch of terrible centralized meme coin, bad projects, things like that. And then, you know, you kind of learn about this Bitcoin thing, you go to it, you go away from it, you come back to it, you learn about it in deeper, kind of a deeper fashion. And then from there, it's just been continual study. And Cael, I think you asked earlier also, like, how did Lucas and I kind of get to going on, like did you ask about the Bitcoin study sessions? Like, that's our podcast now. And so that's kind of, it's a continuation of that, where I just want to continue learning what Bitcoin is on the technological level and the philosophical level, the academic level, all, you know, the agricultural level. And so it's just been a journey, an educational journey from there of wanting to learn about a new phenomenon.
So a musician and a banker on the one side, an attorney on the other. Now I'm understanding some of the dynamics that you guys have going.
Yeah, it's oil and water. It's fun, right? Because it's
Yeah,
just like
me terrified of all the risks when Lucas opens his mouth, and then Lucas is going on about the things he does. So it's a good dynamic.
This is true. Yeah. It's like ice cream and spaghetti or something.
There we go.
What is two different mindsets? I mean, as you think about that, sort of the creative mindset of being at least open to things and willing to play and just say things, and maybe the attorney as the risk mitigator, if not risk manager. How do those two mindsets constructively kind of interact when thinking about something like Bitcoin?
Maybe not on Bitcoin, but on the format of our podcast, what we do is we read primary source materials on Bitcoin. We like to read books on Bitcoin from established authors, if we can, peer-reviewed materials. And so I see kind of my dynamic as I help get the arguments out, present them, digest them, and then Lucas has a much more experimental, speculative take on a lot of the material, who ventures a bit further in understanding that. So that's kind of how I see the podcast dynamic. As far as Bitcoin, you definitely have to understand the risks involved, but you also have to be adventurous and have conviction. So I don't know if Lucas, if you feel the dynamic the same way or.
Yeah, so like the thing that Grant and I really connect on is that we're both fairly high agency people. Grant, there are differences, of course, but Grant's incredibly creative as well. Incredibly creative, incredibly deep thinker, incredibly thoughtful, and also has that same mentality of like, we can just go do this. And then with regard to fun fact, I was in law school and I dropped out because I saw no future for myself in law school. And you're right. Like, it does take a little bit of a risk. I lost out on being state FFA president because my personality score came back and said that I would basically lead a revolt, lead a mutiny. I'm about the least conforming person that they've ever tested on that thing. So it's good to have, because like Grant actually, he'll talk about sometimes, like, he went through this period of like being super libertarian, super anarchical, not really anarchist, but like really, really kind of learning about that. I just sort of came by it naturally. Like, I don't like dumb laws. I think they're stupid. I don't think that I should have to drive 55 if I can do it at 85 safely. You can drive 55. That's fine with me. But I just kind of have this like, the right to swing my fist ends where the other person's nose begins. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, then go ahead and get after it.
It's good to know we have 4 libertarians on the podcast.
There we go.
Reformed libertarian, but I still have sympathies with you. So,
so the article that I referred to earlier that Farm Journal ran was called "Ag Embraces Bitcoin," and if I'm recalling anyway, your discussion, one of you guys described that as your Christmas mailbox moment when you saw Bitcoin on the cover of Farm Journal. So can you take us to that? And
I was back with the folks. I'm sorry to interrupt, Kevin, but I was back with the folks in Northwest Kansas for Christmas. Farm Journal is such a fixture, at least it has been in my folks' household. My dad is a farmer, was a farmer, he's retired now. But Farm Journal has always been there. It's always come in. It's always has timely articles. It's always substantive. It's always, from an outsider perspective, a little boring, but it's necessary. It's just there. And I actually looked up online. It was started in 1877. So it's a fixture, right? And then you also have this other kind of part of your personality where it's a complete rabbit hole into digital currency, right? And then suddenly that breaks containment and you see it on the cover of Farm Journal. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you understand what Bitcoin is about, both like the technology, what it's meant for, what it could be, and the union of the two. But it was just such a great moment to see that, because you kind of see things coming together, threads kind of weaving as they should. And just as somebody, when you get into Bitcoin, you kind of just are waiting to see how is it going to infiltrate into these different trades and industries. And so to see that was kind of a culmination moment where, okay, it's hitting an ag in a very good way. And this is going to disseminate. Who's already talking about it? Lucas and I kind of became interested in that, found your podcast, which is excellent. And from there, it's just been another kind of opening up of the rabbit hole to more people, and just very gratifying.
Yeah, the ag thing, I was actually bummed out that ag did not get onto Bitcoin earlier, because Bitcoin is a commodity, right? It's an asset without an issuer. It's like a calf, it's like wheat, it's like corn. So farmers, ranchers are well versed in commodity markets. They're also well versed in the other part of the financial system, which is getting screwed over by the government. And when I was banking, I actually got taught by a 24-year-old kid how money works, and I had no idea. You know, I got a master's in economics, did all this stuff. I had zero. They don't teach you anything about how markets actually work, how money works, anything. But I had this kid come in. 24-year-old kid had a $7 million balance sheet with a $3 million net worth. And I told him, you're over leveraged. And he goes, no, 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 no. I want all the leverage I can get. I want to have the maximum amount of other people's money doing work for me, because that's the only way I can compete is by size. And I was like, oh, yeah, that actually makes, I'm sitting here in my office, driving a company truck, and here's a 24-year-old kid getting ready to buy an airplane. And he's like, yeah, you probably know what you're talking about. Like, you got this game figured out. And, but it's wrong, right? Like, that's not how, when you think about it, like, that's not how you're supposed to do things. You're not supposed to go into massive, massive debt. You're not supposed to sacrifice the future for the present. It's supposed to be the other way around. You're supposed to work hard today in order to build tomorrow. And so it's this cheat code shortcut that the system needs you to abide by. Like, you have to play that game in order to survive. But ultimately, that's what's going to put that final nail in your coffin, right? And so I was pretty thrilled to see that guys in ag were starting to pay attention, because you've got products now like Stretch and Strive, whatever I think it's SATA, SATA. Why would you buy ground and make, a small amount on it, or cash rent it out or whatever? Deal with, if you're going to put it on a 1 to 3 year variable lease, deal with somebody coming in and raping the ground, or try to put it on a long-term deal and you're going to take less money. Why would you do that when you can just take that $2 million and make 13% tax free on it? Right. So, I think, we've been seeing, especially in the 2000s, so much outside money come into agriculture. Chinese are throwing money back over the wall because they don't want to deal with our treasuries anymore, so they're buying our land. You've got guys that are, had a successful HVAC business in Atlanta, sold it for $4 million. I'll go buy land in the Flint Hills, right? Stuff like that. And so the competition for land is so great because it emulates Bitcoin, because it's limited, it's in scarce supply, and it's desirable, right? So those are it has value and it's desirable. Those are the things that make up something that you want to own. And so there's so many parallels, that, like, guys in ag, what do you say? You say, if you got dirt, you can't get hurt, right? So you got land, you can always mortgage against that land more. And what do they say about land? They ain't making any more of it. Well, that's not true. I lived on a fake island, right? So if you want more land, you can build more land. But generally speaking, it's a useful heuristic to use in decision making. So, yeah, I find that agriculture people should be able to grasp Bitcoin fairly easy, because it makes sense. The dollar doesn't make sense. It's ludicrous. It's insane. There's 12 guys that nobody voted for that are determining global policy for how money works. And this other thing is open to anybody. Nobody has leverage on anybody else. Everybody who participates makes themselves and everybody else better. And it's the one thing in life other than love that you can only give. It cannot be taken from you. So I think that guys in ag are going to wake up to Bitcoin really fast.
Yeah, Lucas, one of the things you talked about on your podcast when you covered the journal was people having to worry about right now, well, if I have a bad year, I might lose some of this land. It would have been really nice if some ag guys got in sooner on Bitcoin, and at this point they would have had that big cushion where, well, the risk is going to fall on your Bitcoin as collateral now instead of your land. Do you have a timeline in your head where you think about, well, as long as ag gets in, maybe before the digital assets and traditional banking industry fully embraces Bitcoin, they'll be fine. We use the power law, so we think there's a lot of time left. But the further we get down this road, the less margin recoup people are going to be able to get back.
So I don't think it's ever too late to get into Bitcoin. I genuinely don't think that, because for the first time ever, we've got a monetary instrument that actually acts like money. It measures price, right? So it's a unit of account, or it's a unit of account. It's like measuring distance with a mile. It's like measuring weight with a pound. The only thing that matters about a unit of account is that it not change, right? So I tell this story a lot, and it may be untrue, but supposedly the world's pound, like the pound that we use to verify other pounds, is housed in an observatory in France, or at least it was in World War II. And it was so important that Hitler avoided bombing that observatory, bombed the hell out of everything else around it, but knew that if we lost this link to what makes a pound, that the world economy would go into shambles. And so you take that and you look at the dollar, and the dollar is like, it's like a slinky. Like, you can't measure something with a slinky, right? Because a slinky is here, and then you could stretch it, and then it can. They raise, or they lower the interest rate, and it stretches the slinky out. They raise it, and it collapses when the supply of money drops down. And so the dollar is a useless account for measuring things. So we've got Bitcoin; it's going to measure things, and I think what you're going to see is that we're hitting this rate of technology that is exponential, to the point that people really notice. It's always been exponential. It's always followed Moore's law, where it's doubling every 2 years. But now it's hitting the point where those doublings, instead of 1 to 2, it's 2,000 to 4,000. It's 10,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 or 20,000 or whatever. It's orders of magnitude. And I think what you're going to see is that Bitcoin is just the barometer for technology improvement. And so prices should fall relative to the amount of technology that is leveraged. I personally don't follow the power law. I don't follow anything, but just in my gut, you talking about like traditional banking, trying to beat them. I believe all 12 of the world's largest banks have now filed to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet within the last 2 years. And they're lending against it. They're sending out recommendations to their clients to hold it in a certain allocation. There is a point at which the floodwaters break, and I'm not hopeful. I just look at it and I say, it appears to be that flood is coming. It looks like that levee's about to break.
Yeah, as near as I can tell, the most pristine capital based upon the lowest interest rates when you use it as collateral is Bitcoin.
Correct.
And what does that say?
Yeah, and it's setting the interest rate, right? So that's what Michael Saylor's doing with Stretch, and what Strive is doing is they're setting the interest rate. They're saying, look, we're entering this death rattle of the US dollar as a currency, where we get to the point where the expansion and contraction of the monetary supply in order to try and keep a hand on inflation is just, it's violent. Right? We're getting these violence. You're watching this in the equities markets right now with a historic run up. Like, it's the valuations are insane. 50x earnings, 100x earnings, right? And you're entering the point where the swings just become really, really big. And if on average, since 1971, we've increased the monetary supply 13% per year, well, 13% that's your hurdle rate. That's, if you're not increasing by 13% a year, if you're not making 13% more every year, you are falling behind. And so we've got Bitcoin out here setting the new benchmark, competing against all global equities, all global bonds, private credit, money markets, savings accounts, CDs, everything. And it's 3 times better than the next best thing and infinitely better than the worst thing. So Yeah, I mean, it's the only thing that, and the thing is, it's the only thing that'll survive that type of thing. Because what it does is it sucks money out of gold, it sucks money out of land, it sucks money out of equities. Why would you take the risk on trying to pick the stock that's going to double? Because you're only going to hit that, one out of every 100 tries. The average S&P company is in the S&P for, I think, 8 years, and it only is a company for 38. And there's literally millions of companies. So good luck picking that one. And the other thing is, whenever one company rises, another company sees profit opportunity. That's Jeff Bezos is saying, is your margin is my opportunity. He's going to go after that. In Bitcoin, there's nobody to come in and take a piece of the pie. All you can do is make that pie bigger. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right when you say that, Kevin. Pristine collateral. Also, like, when I was banking, if you had to foreclose on somebody, it's a nightmare. You don't want to do it. Like, as a banker, you genuinely don't want to do it. And not because you've got a soft heart for them. It's because it's a nightmare. It takes, a year. You've got to pay all kinds of fees. Then you're going to have to run it through an auction, or you're going to have to pay a broker, et cetera, et cetera. And you're just never going to recoup. With Bitcoin, you got it on a smart contract, or you just got it housed. And when you go to claim it, you literally just click the button, and now the collateral's yours. So yeah, way easier on both sides. And it also gets rid of discrimination in lending practices too, right? Because I used to have to deal with these, applications, here's my age, and here's my race, because we got to identify that for the government, and all this other stuff. And here's my credit score, and here's my balance sheet, blah, blah, blah. And then you look at it, and you got two guys that are identical, and one guy we're going to make a loan to because he drank beer with my boss in college, and the other guy we're not because nobody knows him, right? And so you get discriminated against. And this is active practice. And by the way, the standards for verifying this stuff is utterly shameful in agriculture. It's terrifying how easy it is to defraud somebody in agriculture with a false balance sheet or something. So, yeah, Bitcoin, you just link your wallet. Hey, I've got the collateral. Okay, here's your loan. You're done. It takes 5 minutes. You can do it with Strike. You can do it with River. You can do it with Swan, and you got your money. So yeah, perfect.
So you talk about being disappointed about agriculture not being sooner to embrace. And we still, in our everyday experience, have a long ways to go. But the world has a long ways to go. Maybe just to do a bit of a deeper dive on why you think that is. Is it just being wedded to an existing system? Agriculture at every level is a capital-intensive industry. So the likelihood that a farm or an agricultural business has to have a loan just to be a business at any magnitude is like 100%.
I wouldn't say it's that. No. So what I would say is that agriculture, people involved in production agriculture are the most hypocritical people you'll ever meet, because they are libertarian at heart. But what they do is they vote for the guy that's going to give them the biggest bailout, right? So everybody is going to line up when it doesn't rain. They want to make sure that they get their emergency funding. They want to get their backstop. They want to get 80% of their of their crop insurance funded by the government. So they're going to play that game. And what that does is it's like a drug. They get you hooked on that drug. And now if you want to do that, if you want to participate, say, in the crop insurance system, you got to raise the crops that are identified in that system. So you can't go out and raise, organic, non-GMO, something that's going to make you a niche producer in the market and be able to give you a very high profit margin and be able to sell that locally, and capture that. No, what you're going to do is you're going to engage in the ultimate commodity, this heterogeneous. All we're trying to do is take global yield of corn, or national yield of corn, from 177 to 181 bushels a year, et cetera. So what you're doing is you just got people hooked on payments. And, everybody, most people in ag, they vote for, they they think of themselves as free market guys, you know, and by the way, they got big balls because it takes a lot of guts to put everything you have into the ground and then just go back and pray for rain, right? Because it's out of your control. But in truth, you know, everybody wants to vote for freedom and vote for the right to have guns and blah, blah, blah. They'll get you on abortion and stuff. So you push this way. But in reality, you're just there to get your payment because they've this nanny state type of approach has got everybody hooked onto the teat of government payments. And it's really hard to get people off of it, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say that's a larger problem for the whole country.
It is, but I would say it's even more pronounced in ag because you open a hot dog stand, nobody's going to give you a bailout when nobody's buying hot dogs, right? But you know, I remember when COVID hit, there was a program that came out, I think in May of that year, or maybe a little earlier. There was this period from like February to March or April or something like that when the livestock prices dipped down. And so the government was just going to literally hand you money for every cow that you had, every calf that you sold, etc. And I knew immediately how much fraud that was going to create because I had one of my customers who I thought was a fairly straight up guy call me and go, well, here's the thing. I get $100 a head for every calf that I sold. So what if I just backdate a check showing that I sold my calves from my entity to myself? And then I've got that there. Then I collect $100. And I said, man, I don't want to be your cellmate. So I'm going to pretend that this conversation never happened. But then I hung up the phone and I realized that there's going to be a lot of people that don't call their banker before they do that. They'll just do it and they'll present it and nobody will catch it. And then there's also going to be people that go in it together and say, all right, give me 20 of it and we'll move on. So it just encourages fraud.
Yeah. Well, moving down the list here, you guys have worked through some dense material. What does the philosophical layer matter to you? And how do you decide what makes the reading list?
Grant. This is all Grant.
No,
He's,
man.
he's the philosophy major. He's the philosophy
Heidegger,
major.
for goodness sakes.
Yeah, we did some dense philosophy for sure. So just generally, right, if you want to understand something new, you need to think in new ways. And so you kind of have to get out of the box. And what philosophy helps us do is kind of entertain new lenses for seeing things. We read Heidegger and he talks about technology is not neutral. We kind of look at technology falls into the background all around us and we don't see it for what it is, which is something that kind of has certain values in it and makes us look at the world in different ways. Kind of the thinking is on the more philosophical material is we can help ourselves see better into the future if we entertain different ways of seeing. And for example, Peter Thiel, he was a philosophy major. He was also an early investor in Facebook, made a ton of money. One of the philosophers that he follows is this guy named Girard. And his idea was that desire is mimetic. We want what we see other people wanting. And so he gets kind of this idea in his head. And then, well, look at Facebook. Here's this huge arena where we're suddenly going to see other people liking things. We're going to see how people, what kind of comes up as the object of desire. We're going to coordinate on that. So he gets in early. He makes a ton of money. You look at Palantir, Alex Karp, also a philosopher. And so you kind of ask yourself, well, how can I see into the future a bit? How can I cultivate new ways of seeing the future? And so you had Vance Crowe on your show, and he mentions that he uses the Peter Thiel question a lot in his interviews, which is, what's something that you believe in that other people don't believe in, something like that, or you hold to be true that other people don't. And so that's also a question that's meant to get us out of that framework of mimetic desire, to free us from seeing how other people see. If you can kind of entertain, what do I see differently, then you're kind of beginning to see and think in a philosophical way. And then as it relates to Bitcoin actually has a social layer. So Bitcoin's a technology. It operates based on people running nodes and miners hashing to solve the block. And then mine Bitcoin. There's all this technology involved, right? We all know that. But there's also a social layer where we all coordinate on Bitcoin having value as a monetary asset. And so that's in the realm of ideas at that point. And so if we want to understand why do we coordinate on Bitcoin, you need to understand the technology, but you also need to understand a bit about kind of the history of sovereignty. Why is sovereignty important? You need to understand like the philosophical development of property rights, what it meant to own something in the past when it was kind of only protected by legal frameworks, and what it means to own something now when you can own Bitcoin by simply having information in your head. Lucas alluded to that earlier. They can't take it away from you because you own Bitcoin by having the keys, so to speak, in your own mind. And so Bitcoin is a technology, but it's also an idea. And so if you want to understand it more, enrich kind of the realm of ideas that you have flying around in your head. And we might even ask ourselves, what kind of retroactively, how could I have got into Bitcoin earlier? And if you have been kind of in the thought sphere, thinking about freedom and sovereignty and liberty and things like this, well, the earliest people kind of backing Bitcoin were this community called the cypherpunks. And it was really a philosophical movement about how you can't vote your way out of a problem. You can't really violence your way out of a problem. The only way for us to do it is to make things. And it's really a philosophically rich idea. So maybe if I and other people too had been thinking in these ways more philosophically in 2009, 2010, you might have got on a lot earlier. And maybe if you begin thinking that way now, you're also going to understand the potential of Bitcoin beyond simply the fluctuating volatile price. And if you don't understand that, then the moment the market goes down, you're going to sell. Conviction is ultimately based on more than price. It's based on a philosophically grounded idea of Bitcoin's potential. And so I really do think if you want to not only understand Bitcoin, but actually use it in the way that it's kind of designed to be used, you have to have an intellectual grounding for why it has value.
Yeah, let me tag onto that. So what Grant said about it being a social layer, and one of the essays that we read in Natalie Smolinski's book.
It's by Andrew Bailey and Craig
Bailey.
Warmke. What Satoshi did. It's an excellent essay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it talks about how Bitcoin it's a social layer, it's a social protocol, much like the English language is a social protocol, right? So basically all the world's coding is done in English. Why? Because English is really, really good at logic, and it's also really consistent. So it makes it easy to do that. But to tag on to what he's talking about with Facebook, when what we saw with Facebook was this explosion of only the best of what you experience is what you're going to share with the world. And so it just creates this non-ending cycle of like jealousy and envy and desire of what other people have, because you're only choosing to show kind of the best side of you. When I was in grad school, we would do surveys in order to gain information, right? You send out surveys to farms, and I instantly knew they were useless because I remember my dad getting those surveys on the farm, and he would literally fill out. He's like, I have 10 acres and 12,000 goats, and send it back in. And he's like, yeah, they don't need to know. But there's this thing, revealed preferences and stated preferences, right? So there's this guy that does interviews where he goes and he talks to people about the immigration issue. And he says, do you think that we should be giving immigrants, like free housing and all this stuff? Like, oh yeah, like they should definitely, people should take them in and blah, blah, blah. And then his next question is, well, we've got 5 of them right here. Can they come home with you? And then all of a sudden, I've got a cat. My grandma's staying with me. It just wouldn't work for me. Like not so. So that's the difference between stated preferences and revealed preferences. And there's no better example of what your revealed preference is than where you put your money, right? So what you spend your money on is what you care about. So Bitcoin as an expression of your value, as an expression of your revealed preference, is an ultimate, it's an ultimate freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom of assembly, freedom of basically anything, your freedom of making your thoughts into reality. It is that freedom that it allows. And that's something you can't do with the dollar. That's something you can't do with any currency that has a controller that can ultimately say, no, you want $20,000? Sorry, today's not the day. You're going to have to do that in 2 separate transactions, or we're going to report you as a terrorist. You know, you want to spend your money on this thing. Sorry, that's just not. We're just not going to allow you, literally not allow you to do that. You know, so yeah, Bitcoin has a lot of value there in expressing the social layer of our desire.
Let's maybe dive a little bit deeper on your guys' experience with that social layer. Zooming back to last year, even in advance of actually starting Bitcoin, I went out to the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. I just do not, speaking of revealed preference, I do not like Vegas very much. Anyway,
Same.
It's my own thing. It's just, yeah. If somebody wants to gamble, that's fine, but I'm not going to, and it's just tacky. And
It's nice that they put hell into one zip code, though.
I guess that's true. Anyway, Cael teased me knowing that I had a bit of an attitude and said, don't worry about Kevin. Only 10% of the people you meet at the Bitcoin conference will be on cocaine. And I'm like, just stop talking.
That's fair.
Anyway, what I told everybody when I came back, coming from not a population dense area where I live in Ames, or a Bitcoin owning dense area, is that the wholesomeness almost of the people that I met at this 35,000 person conference was stark. It was way more people, but it was like being at, pick your agriculture conference, like the Land Expo in Des Moines, where there's, older couples that have some money just trying to do things the right way. There's young families with their children there. I mean, we have very little money, but they're just trying to figure out how to live life the right way. There's a session on rescuing people from essentially sexual slavery and some of the efforts by the Bitcoin community there. There's a session on what you eat, and like the carnivore diet is like a big deal. And anyway, I'm sure you guys have experienced this more, but if you could just comment kind of on that social layer, the people part of the emergent network, and what it's like and what your own observations are.
This is what I call the Bitcoin stack, which is that when you understand what Bitcoin is, then you understand that by owning Bitcoin, the longer you live, the richer you get, right? Because 10 years ago, a house cost, 40,000 Bitcoin. 4 years ago, a house cost 4,000 Bitcoin. Today, a house costs 4 or 6 Bitcoin, right? So if I project out into the future, my buying power increases. And that is ultimately absolutely different than operating on the dollar. Operating on the dollar, we're all running around like rats trying to get off of a sinking ship. And so when you understand Bitcoin, you understand, hey, the longer I live, the better my life is going to get. Then you have to just start looking at the other things that you do in your life. Why do I drink? Probably not a good thing. It's not helping me out, so maybe I'll quit doing that. Why does my back hurt? Well, probably because I don't work out. Maybe I should go get my ass in shape a little bit, because I'm going to be really wealthy when I'm 100 years old, but I got to make it to 100 years old, right? And I'm going to be able to do better things for my family. I'm going to look around at my relationships, and I'm going to get that right. I'm going to look at my relationship with God, and I'm going to get that right. And so it has this fall-on effect of everything in your life. You start reevaluating it from a perspective that is more natural, more true to who you should be, as opposed to running on this hedonic treadmill of always trying to keep up with the Joneses. So that's my take on it. Grant's always got good takes on this. So I'm going to throw it over to you, man.
No, I totally agree with that. That the kind of the parlance we use in the Bitcoin community is that it lowers your time preference, that it makes you, there was an experiment they did at one point, the marshmallow experiment, where they take a little kid, they put him in a room and they put a marshmallow in front of him and they say, we're going to leave. If you don't eat this marshmallow, when we come back, we're going to give you 5 marshmallows. And so, the kid, some of them they just can't take it. They got to eat the marshmallow. The ones that waited, though, they did a follow-up study, and their outcomes in life were much better. If you can control your present desire for future gain, if you can have low time preference, it's going to redound in many ways in your life. And I think this connects back to agriculture, at least that in the sense that Bitcoin cultivates certain values that, from my own experience, I saw in farmers. I mean, so Lucas mentioned that kind of reluctantly, there's this, bipolar aspect where farmers are very distrustful of the government, but then they have to kind of get into the system and take the money. But what Bitcoin philosophically really does is it encourages the self-sovereignty that farmers and most people want to aspire to. You can hold your own money. Bitcoin, one of the brilliant aspects of it is that it eliminates intermediaries, the people that stand between you and your own money, the people that stand between you and the person that you want to transact with. If you use Bitcoin, you can keep it in your own wallet without a bank. If you want to transact with somebody, you can do it directly peer-to-peer. These are values that I really see in my father and see in other farmers, that they want. You want your piece of land, you want it to be yours, you want to do things with it and on it that nobody can stop you from doing. And Bitcoin in its own way helps materially do that. And then also just philosophically in the ways that the Bitcoin stack that Lucas mentioned, it cultivates other values that I think many farmers really hold dear.
Yeah, nobody's got a low time preference like a farmer. My dad is 70 years old. He's had cancer. He's got one kidney. He's not in good shape. His body hurts all the time. But the day that we bought him Bitcoin, he went and planted 80 trees. Those trees aren't going to grow for decades, right? That shade will be there in a couple decades, but that's the kind of the ultimate expression of low time preference is planting a tree.
I think it's so interesting that everyone here is connecting purpose and kind of a spiritual theological angle to Bitcoin. I can't help but do that myself as I live through my life to everything. So it's been interesting to kind of explore those avenues with Bitcoin. What does Bitcoin give you? Well, it gives you sovereignty, authority, dominion, and you need discernment, which is really interesting. One thing
Yeah.
I thought you were going to mention, Kevin, but you didn't mention, is people at the Bitcoin conference were wearing Jesus loves Bitcoin shirts. And then you were talking about Peter Thiel and Karpov, and those two are entrenched in theology as well, which is really interesting. And the Facebook, the engine that Peter Thiel took apart in creating, I see it kind of as the opposite side of the spectrum. I don't want to go make enemies of people, but there's kind of two sides here. I see a good in Bitcoin being a vessel of abundance and provision, and then I see a bad where people are reverse engineering, the other side of that equation to make us fall into the pitfalls of what we're seeing as Facebook as a social layer, what we're seeing from the consolidation and centralization of the system and the slinky that we've created everywhere. Bitcoin is the way out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your opportunity to reassess. So Charlie Munger, his famous saying is always invert, like just invert. So the Inflation Reduction Act actually created more inflation than we've ever seen, right? These we've passed stuff about freedom of expression that just limits your opportunity to express freedom, like always invert. So just like a really good thought model is, this is what I say, is that anyone offering you protection is the person you need protection against, right? So we'll house your money for you. I probably need to think about just why you want to do that. And then it becomes the mafia form of protection, right? Where, oh, we're offering you protection. Well, what happens if I don't take your protection? Well, you're going to find out. It'd be a shame if something happened to this place, right? And that's ultimately just what happened.
And I don't think it's strange that Bitcoin does encourage us to have these sort of reflections. Some people kind of hear this and they think, the Bitcoiners are crazy. But what Bitcoin is, it's a measure of value, and it's a new type of money, right? And if you look at the anthropological history of money, you see that it goes clear back to notions of debt, and that debt is this religious concept of debt towards a higher being. And so if we have a new way of measuring value, it just totally makes sense that we're going to begin to reevaluate what is valuable in our lives and to work for that.
That's right. That's why usury was banned.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. You start learning about words like usury and, stuff like that. Like I didn't know, these are biblical terms, right?
Yeah.
and they are present in our lives in a nearly unavoidable way, but it's becoming easier and easier to avoid that because you have Bitcoin.
Kevin, if I could get in here one more time before you ask a question. I personally make the claim, and I've mentioned this to Kevin, that we are all participating in demonology every day with the use of technology, and usury is all around us. We're all using it, and which is just so interesting to me as we go, everything comes back to these biblical terms. Some people think that Revelations is somewhat taking place right now, and I also think about Nikola Tesla, who says, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency. Yeah,
Frequency, energy, and vibration.
that's right. That's
Yep.
right. And Bitcoin is actually just storing energy. If you look across your field, well, you're storing energy and you're creating Bitcoin mines in the form of corn, where you're harvesting energy from the sun. It- And I just can't stop thinking about that.
Yeah. Yeah. This, I mean, it's impossible not to be philosophical about Bitcoin, because I think at nature we're all philosophical, right? We all used to sit and have our thoughts, and now we don't have our thoughts because we have technology that's in this really awkward phase where it is ever present. I think the future of technology is way better, where, like say a child is meant to be seen and not heard. I think technology is meant to be neither seen nor heard, just out of the way. But we're in this time period now where we do this with our thumbs and we're looking at like this, and we've got screens that are ever present, and technology is just overwhelming. And we're entering this stage where I think we're gonna be able to move that to the side. So I'm very hopeful for that. It makes you very optimistic for the future.
Well, and it's a more natural way of being. And I know I certainly have gotten the cringe looks when I'm in front of an audience and I say, Bitcoin is the most natural form of money we've ever had. And I understand the hesitation, of course, for somebody from the outside. It's like, it's a digital thing. But it's more in line with how nature works, how we work as people, or how we're intended to work. And maybe just to wrap up on this, you guys have had Jeff Booth on your show. One of the really interesting thinkers. I haven't had a chance to meet him, but he states something that all of us who went to graduate school, Lucas, for economics should understand, that deflation is the natural state of things, right? If you're competing as a business every day to provide more value tomorrow than you did yesterday, you're going to offer what you did cheaper, or you're going to offer more than what you offered for the same price. So how do you think that applies in agriculture, again, where we're used to this thing where we're trying to scale up so we can produce at a lower price, but we're used to our input costs always more or less going up over the course of time?
Yeah. So you're trading commodity for the same price that your grandpa did, effectively. Like maybe a little more, but not a whole lot. But the land has 20x in value. Your inputs have gone up 50x. So let's say you get a 2x increase on your output, but your inputs are up by 30x. You can't live that way, right? The only way that you can live that way is to continuously steal from the future and bring that into the present, to go into further and further debt and bring that into the present. And if your listeners leave here with only one thing, it should be to ask themselves, if technology makes things better, why are prices always going up? And they'll get to it eventually. But the answer is that someone has control of the money, and they are making the money worthless faster than technology is making things more valuable. And that should be terrifying, because we have supersonic jets now. And in World War I, people rode into battle on horses. In fact, I think in World War II, there were still cavalry units at the beginning of it, right? And by the end of that, we had nukes. So the acceleration of technology is incredible, yet it's still not fast enough to outpace the way that the government makes your money more worthless every single day. A Coke costs $3 now. If you're in Sacramento or Singapore, it might cost $7, right? That is the exact same Coke Well, it's actually way worse because now it's full of chemicals. Used to have actually cocaine in it. That'd be a bonus. But that's the same Coke that cost a nickel 100 years ago. So it's increased in price, 60x, 70x, 100x. We're making it without people. It's all roboticized. Everything's easier. Everything's cheaper. Yet you're paying 100x more or 80x more, 60x more for the price. Think about that and then look into Bitcoin and understand that the thing that matters about money is that the supply of it doesn't change. Because if the supply of it changes, it is useless to measure price. If I measure you today and I tell you that you're 6 foot tall, and I come back in a week and I tell you, we added a bunch more inches and made all the other inches proportionally smaller, now you're 13 feet tall, you would instantly understand that that's bullshit. You would instantly get, this is not true. However, if I go, hey, that piece of ground, that quarter that you bought for 10 grand, now it costs 40 grand, you think that you're doing well. And it's the same quarter. And all you're doing is exporting the minerals, exporting the nutrients, and exporting the water to the coast. And you're having to replace that every single year, putting on more NPK, putting on more micros, pumping water on it, etc., in order to try and recoup. So you're in a losing system, and it's designed to lose. It's designed to take money from the people and put it in the hands of the government until it becomes so worthless that we start over. That's just how it goes, right? So get out of that system.
On that note, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. How can our audience connect with you and what you do?
I'm at Lucas Maddy, LucasMaddy, D as in dog on X, and at Lucas Maddy Music on Instagram. If you want to find some, I prefer to play music. Talking about Bitcoin's fun, but that's me. So yeah, Grant.
Yeah, no, Lucas is an excellent musician. I would, if you're interested in agriculture and kind of the romance of rural living, you will find just some excellent material in Lucas's songs. They're fantastic. Our podcast is Bitcoin Study Sessions. It's on YouTube. So yeah,
and
you can find us there.
Spotify.
And Spotify.
YouTube,
and Fountain.
Spotify, and X. Yeah, and Fountain. It's on Nostr as well.
Yeah.
And
Bitcoin.
follow Grant. Follow Grant at the whole frame on X, and I don't know what you are on Instagram, but Grant has us. Okay, fine. Find his pictures because he's an incredible photographer and he takes beautiful pictures. So just find him. He won't tell you, but you can find him.
I don't even know what it is. It's like Grant M. Reichert or Grant Reichert, my name, but no, it's in keeping with our love of kind of rural vibes. I like to take photos of small towns and things like that. So.
Very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Yeah,
for everything you do.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. All right.